And then St. Stephen's College in 1860, which was renamed Bard College. And Bard became the 56th university nationwide to join the Slavery in the University Project. And that was back in 2019. Now there are more than 100 participants in that project, and they're all looking into their early workers, early students, and their descendants so that they can connect the stories of the African Americans who have been involved with the university to the descendants. And there also are a number of historically Black colleges and predominantly Black institutions that are a part of this initiative, including Hampton, Stillman, and Virginia State. So one of the elements of Bard's Reconciliation Project is a sort of a Black cultural center, a community center on campus called the Gilson Place, and it's named for an African American who was the head gardener on campus and then later went on to own a prosperous nursery business. So many of the churches, again, all of the denominations, not just the Episcopalians, were involved in educating, and even though it was the Anglicans who started this process, often when they report on their work, they talk about the industrial high schools. Many of the schools they started as colleges or started as high schools and then became colleges. And those distinctions were not so much as we make of them today. Remember, we're talking about educating people who had a full range of educational accomplishments. And so often higher education is a broad category that doesn't necessarily start where we think of as something starting after someone is 18 years old and has taken certain credits in X, Y, and Z. Of course, those kinds of things developed over the years. This writer, Dr. Richings, in 1902, gives a really good account or thorough account of the schools that existed by then. Maybe I shouldn't have a school list before 58. And he says that in this book, you will learn how men and women left their homes of ease and comfort and went among the newborn freedmen and assisted in reconstructing the individual and home life. You will also learn the names of noble men and women who have founded, supported, and endowed institutions for the training of the head, hand, and heart. And you will see an account of the schools funded, how the schools were founded, manned, and supported by the race itself. And for the first time, the world will be enlightened as to what the race is doing for its own education. Illustrations of buildings, presidents, professors, and students will gladden your eyes. And Arnett was a bishop in the AME church. So when the Episcopal Church printed a list or a booklet about its undertakings for teaching African Americans to date back in 1921, by then it was operating under what it called the American Church Institute for Negroes. And it said in this booklet that it wanted to emphasize the obligation of the church for the moral and spiritual advancement of the Negro race. And also evoke from the communicants a generous response. And the American Church Institute for Negroes operated from this stately building on 4th Avenue in New York City. And its mission was to produce just as upright and stately human beings as indicated here in this sterling example of African American Church Institute training. So depending upon how you count, there were either 10 to 12 schools, and particularly the ones shown on the right here. And we'll just take a quick look through those 12. First, there was Gaudette. One of the interesting things about it is that it had a wonderful orchard. It had a farm that was relatively common. The students learned advanced farming techniques. You see them here training the hands to useful work. Every part of this wagon was made by the students. Here they're learning, they're sewing. And second, we have the Okolona School in Mississippi. You can see the main building here with lots of attendees, the power plant manned fully by the students. You see deeper plowing, technique learned on campus for better crops. Number 3 was Vicksburg. One of the details about it, you can see its manual training room there, and it had about 250 students in 1921, and they learned cooking, sewing, laundering, basket making, carpentry, gardening, and the regular school branches. Number 4 was St. Mark's in Birmingham. One of the interesting elements about that place is its lay reader was a man from Jamaica who brought communicants from his home country as well. And you can see some of them here in 1892 at its 18th commencement. And here's another look at the main building. Some of the students of St. Mark's, of course, future teachers and military people, and church people, that's what they were well trained for. Then number 5, St. Athanasius in Brunswick, Georgia. You can see the main building here, students making baskets. St. Augustine's, number 6 in North Carolina, teacher training building. St. Augustine's is one of the several that remains open with its current thriving students, some of whom you can see here speaking with President Ward. And here you see them juxtaposed with some of the earlier students who went on to become men of the cloth. Here you see the chapel, which was central always ideologically at the schools and often geographically as well. Here you see one of the dormitories and students doing fine needlework. And St. Augustine's operated a hospital for some time. And note at the bottom there, where the head of it graduated. Let's see. 86. And you can see the school here. Or the hospital, St. Agnes's Hospital. And many prominent African Americans spent time educating their fellow freedmen and enslaved people at St. Augustine's. One of the most prominent is Bishop Henry Delaney. If you know anyone from that school, it's probably him. He's a graduate. He was a leader of it for years. He's a parent of students. You may know the book Having Our Say, the Delaney sisters, two of his daughters. So he was the first African-American ordained bishop in the Episcopal Church. So just as there is a day on the Episcopal Church calendar for Absalom Jones, who was the first ordained priest, there's also a day on the calendar for Henry Beard Delaney, who was ordained the first African-American bishop in the Episcopal Church. And then for number 7, there was St. Stephen, started in 1866. And then it had a theology school named for James Paine, who was the first Episcopal bishop in Liberia. And so while the school was operating, a fine young man who had completed his studies at Hampton University wanted to study for the seminary, and Virginia Theological Seminary refused his application on the grounds of his race. What they did instead was pay a theology professor to teach him at St. Stephen's. And then St. Stephen's grew into Bishop Paine Divinity School, and that became the most important higher education institution in the Episcopal Church for educating African Americans, counted here as its 8th school. It was so proficient at its work that as of 1921, its alumni constituted 60% of the Episcopal Black clergy in the United States. Here you see its main building, some of the other buildings on campus, including the warden's home, again, the chapel, central in all of the African-American early schools, whether ideologically or definitely ideologically and sometimes physically. Here's the main building again from another angle. And then for school number 7, the Reverend James Solomon Russell, who had studied at Hampton and studied theology at Bishop Paine, went on to found St. Paul's School in Lawrenceville. So you can see some of his graduating students in 1917, and just like Booker T. Washington graduated from Hampton and then went on to found an African-American institution of higher education, so too did Solomon, and they spent time together on each other's campuses, trading notes, etc. And Russell was appointed the first African-American, or the first archdeacon of colored work in the Diocese of Southern Virginia. You can see some images here of the students at St. Paul's. That school closed in 2013. And the marching band marching to the chapel, cooking, other school images, named people in the school yearbook. The students erected their buildings entirely by bricks that they fashioned at the school. Here's the new dormitory in the background, and you see gardening in the foreground. More of the dormitory and drill team. And again, St. Paul's closed in 2013, but over the years, it had a rich history, including that Solomon's son, James Alvin Russell Solomon, was head of the school for some years. And Solomon is designated a saint for the Diocese of Southern Virginia. So many of his descendants And some local people in Lawrenceville have started a museum to keep his memory alive and keep the school alive. Again, when it closed, it was one of more than 187. It was about the 188th African-American higher education institution to close in this country. Since then, Concordia in Birmingham has closed, and Lincoln in Illinois, and about 100 remain open.